My name is Sophie Fowler, and at 34 I learned what a single sheet of paper can cost a man. The man was my adoptive father, Raymond Albright, and he learned it at his own 65th birthday party. He lifted his glass in front of 60 guests and said the thing he'd been saving for years. "You're not really mine. I just forgot to cross you out of the will." The room laughed. Crystal met crystal. A woman near the window remarked it was just like Raymond, to be so refreshingly candid. Everyone laughed but me. They had no idea what was already in my purse. They had no idea what I had signed at 9 that morning, or why my hands remained perfectly still while the laughter rolled across the tables and the cake sat there with its 65 candles burning low. What I did next is the only reason I'm telling you this. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet the moment that changes everything and choose dignity over noise. If you have ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family, like someone who was permitted to attend but never quite permitted to belong, then this story is for you. Drop a comment and let me know you are here. And be sure to subscribe, because the part that matters comes later, and you are going to want to see his face when he finally understands. Let me go back 6 weeks, to a Tuesday that began like every other good day I had built for myself. I was in the Bright Frame Homes office by 7, before the phones, before anyone needed me to be anything. Bright Frame is the company I founded, and we build net-zero modular houses, the kind that cost less to heat through a Michigan winter than the electric bill on a single difficult month. I signed a 40-unit contract that morning. 40 families who would own something warm and entirely theirs. I remember the pen, the quiet, the small, clean satisfaction of work that holds up. Then my assistant placed the mail on my desk, and the envelope was on top. Heavy cream stock, my old name written in Diane's careful hand. Sophie Albright, not Fowler. They never used Fowler. Inside was an invitation to Raymond's 65th, gold lettering, a country club address in Briar Hollow, the town where I had learned to make myself small. I read it twice. Then I set it face down on the desk the way you set down something scalding, and I returned to the contract. The contract made sense. 40 roofs, 40 furnaces, numbers that behaved. The invitation did not behave. It sat there face down all morning, and I felt it the way you feel a draft from a door you were certain was shut. I am a person who resolves things. I had spent my entire adult life converting hurt into something useful. But I had no idea yet what I would do with this one. And the not knowing followed me out to the parking lot and rode beside me the whole way home. I was 5 when the Albrights brought me home. I remember the scent of their car and the way Diane held my hand in both of hers, as though I were something she had waited a very long time to hold. For a while, it was genuinely good. She bought me a yellow coat and presented me at the garden club, and the women declared how courageous she was, how generous. What a gift I was receiving. That was always the word they used about me. Gift. Diane had spent years wanting a child and not conceiving one, and somewhere inside all that longing, she decided that saving a child would mend what her body wouldn't. I understand that now in a way I never could then. She did not adopt a daughter so much as adopt a story about herself, a story she could offer at parties. And for a few years, I was content to serve as proof of her goodness. The warmth was real, I believe. But it always had an audience. She would brush my hair before church and say, just loud enough for the neighbor to hear, that she had rescued me from nothing and shaped me into something. I learned early to stand still and allow myself to be admired, because being admired felt near enough to being loved that a small child couldn't distinguish between the two. I could make that distinction now. The strange thing about being someone's good deed is that you can be set aside the moment a more compelling story arrives. And a better story was coming. Diane simply didn't know it yet, and neither did I. The last good year of my childhood was already counting down without any of us hearing the clock. When I was 8, Diane became pregnant. The doctors had called it impossible, and then it wasn't, and Spencer was born in March with Raymond's chin in Diane's eyes and a monogram blanket waiting before he even had a name. I loved him at first. I was 8 and he was small, and I believed a brother was the thing that would finally make me belong. But something shifted in that house, slow and absolute, like a turning season. The photographs changed first. The new ones held 3 people, and I would find myself standing just outside the frame, holding someone's coat, asked to take the picture rather than stand in it. Then the seating changed. At Sunday dinners, there were 5 matching chairs at the table, and one folding chair that lived in the hall closet, and the folding chair became mine. No one announced it. Diane simply placed it at the corner near the kitchen door. And one evening when I reached for an empty seat at the table, she rested her hand on my shoulder and positioned it, gently, in front of everyone. "You'll take the folding chair." I was 8. I took the folding chair. I took it for the next 10 years. Every holiday, every birthday, the cold metal of it pressed against the backs of my knees. And I told myself it meant nothing. It was simply where I sat. A chair is just a chair, the way a single sheet of paper is just paper, until the day it isn't. I would think about that folding chair far more than I expected to. I would think about it in a country club in Briar Hollow decades later, with a glass of champagne sweating in my hand and 60 people watching. But I am getting ahead of myself. Raymond was more difficult to read than Diane because Raymond was mostly absent. He sold commercial insurance and golfed and came home exhausted, and his idea of fatherhood was paying for things and receiving gratitude. With Spencer, it was different. Spencer got the catch in the backyard, the front seat, his name spoken with warmth. I received the checkbook version of a father, the kind who signs the school form and never inquires what the form is for. I told myself that men were simply built that way, until the night I learned otherwise. I was 10. I had come downstairs for water, and Raymond and his brother were in the den with the television turned low, and I heard my name. So I stopped in the darkened hallway, the way children instinctively do. His brother had asked Raymond something about me, about college someday, about what they'd set aside. And Raymond left. Not cruelly, just carelessly, the way you might speak about a houseplant someone left in your care. "She's Diane's, not mine. Diane's project." Then the game came back up, and that was the end of it. I stood in that hallway for a long time. I didn't cry, which surprised even me. I simply understood something and filed it away, the way I would later file invoices and contracts and the names of people who honored their word. "She's Diane's, not mine." I carried that sentence for 24 years. I carried it through every folding chair and every photograph I took instead of stood in. And I want you to remember it because Raymond was going to say a version of it again someday, into a microphone with cake in front of him, and by then I would be prepared. At 18, the support ended the way a faucet ends, all at once, without ceremony. Spencer was 10 and receiving a tutor and a trip to Spain. I received a graduation card with $40 inside and a line from Diane about how independent I was, how I'd be fine, how I always landed on my feet. It wasn't a kindness. It was a dismissal. So I packed what fit into 2 duffel bags and left Briar Hollow. And here is where the story stops being sorrowful, because I refused to render myself pathetic for anyone, including the people who tried. I found work framing houses. I was the only woman on the crew for 2 years, and I learned to swing a hammer all day and read blueprints all night at the community college. I discovered that I loved building things that would outlast the people who built them. There was a phrase Raymond used to repeat at every family dinner, something he wanted so badly it had become a running joke. "When my ship comes in, we'll have Lawn Lake." Loon Lake was the grand stone house on the water at the edge of town, the one with the boathouse, the one wealthy men in Briar Hollow measured themselves against. Raymond had wanted it his entire life and never once been able to afford it. I used to hear that phrase and believe that wanting was the same as deserving. It took me years on a framing crew, sawdust in my hair, to understand they are not the same thing at all. I stopped waiting for a seat at anyone's table. I started learning how to build tables. And somewhere in those years, without yet realizing it, I was learning how to build Loon Lake too. Bright Frame began in a rented bay with a partner who departed after a year. Alone, I signed a loan at 27. The idea was straightforward and unglamorous. Build quality houses in a factory, ship them flat, make them so efficient that the heating bill embarrasses the old way of doing things. For 3 years, I slept in the office more nights than not. Then a county housing authority took a chance on us for a 30-home development, and it worked. The next county called, and the one after that. By 34, I employed 110 people, and the company was worth more than I permitted myself to say aloud. I had built it with no inheritance, no windfall, no wealthy uncle. Just years that nobody applauded. And here is the part one I'm not proud of. With every good year, I sent the Albright something. A Christmas basket, a check towards Spencer's car, a new furnace for the house the winter Raymond mentioned twice that theirs was failing. I told myself I was being gracious. The truth is quieter and uglier than that. I had spent my whole life attempting to purchase a seat at a table that wasn't mine, and money was simply the adult version of taking the folding chair without complaint. I was generous the way some people are generous, hoping that if I gave enough, someone would finally turn and say, "Sit here with us, you belong." Nobody ever did. I just kept building, kept giving, kept working past midnight in an office I owned alone, while the people I was trying to reach didn't notice and never asked. I couldn't see the pattern then. I would see it soon, all at once in a single screenshot. The phone rang 2 days after the invitation arrived, and it was Brenda. Brenda is Raymond's younger sister, and she is the one person in that family who ever treated me like a person rather than a project. When I was small, she would slip me the good cookies and call me kiddo and ask what I actually thought about things. She had argued with Diane more than once on my behalf. Quietly, in kitchens where it never changed anything, but where at least somebody saw. "They really want you there, Soph," she said. "Raymond's turning 65. People mellow. Maybe it's a chance." I sat with that. Maybe it's a chance. I am a capable woman in most rooms. But families make you foolish in a particular way, because the 8-year-old who wanted to belong never fully departs. She simply waits at the back of the chest for someone to crack the door. "I don't know," I told Brenda. "I'll think about it." But I had already begun thinking about it the wrong way. The old way. The giving way. I was thinking, what could I bring? Not a bottle of wine, not a card. Something that would finally be sufficient. Something that would make Raymond look at me and revise the sentence he had spoken in the den when I was 10. I lay awake that night calculating my own worth in dollars, which is a terrible way to fall asleep. And somewhere in the dark, an idea arrived that should have alarmed me and instead felt like relief. Loon Lake. The house he had wanted his entire life. I could give him the one thing he had never been able to reach. I had no idea yet that the gift was about to teach me something I was not prepared to learn. I want to be honest about why I decided to go. Because the simpler version makes me appear better than I was. The simple version is that I went to make peace. The true version is that I went to win. Not loudly, not with a scene, but the way I win at everything, by being so undeniably good that the verdict has to change. If I handed Raymond the deed to Loon Lake on his 65th birthday in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress, then the sentence, "She's Diane's, not mine," would simply cease to exist. He would have to claim me. He would have to in front of the whole club, with the boathouse practically thrown in. That was the plan. And I dressed it in the language of generosity. I called Brenda back and said I'd come. She was so moved she cried a little. I told myself her happiness confirmed I was doing the right thing. But beneath all the planning, there was a quiet hum I refused to examine, the hum of a woman about to spend $4 million to be told she was loved. I had done smaller versions of this for 20 years. The basket, the furnace, the checks. This was simply the largest folding chair I had ever pulled out for myself. I didn't see it then. You rarely do from the inside. What I saw was a beautiful gesture and a clean ending, the prodigal daughter buying her own way back into the family that had let her go. I began making calls about the property the very next morning. And the strange thing is the universe offered it up almost too easily, as though it wanted me to learn the lesson the expensive way. Loon Lake was for sale. I nearly laughed when the agent confirmed it. The man who had owned it for 40 years had passed away in February, and his children, living in Phoenix and Denver, having no interest in a stone house in Michigan, had listed it quietly that spring. $4 million, give or take, for the house, the boathouse, 11 acres, and the longest stretch of private shoreline in the county. This was the house Raymond had measured his entire life against. When I was young, he would drive us past it on Sunday afternoons, slowing so we could all look. Diane would say, "Someday." He would say, "When my ship comes in." And Spencer would press his face to the glass, as though the place were already his. They could never touch it. Raymond sold insurance. The math never worked. He spent 40 years wanting something he was never going to have and telling everyone he was going to have it, which I have come to believe is a particular kind of quiet suffering. And now here it was on the market, 3 weeks before his birthday, as if the timing had been arranged by someone with a crueler sense of humor than mine. I drove out on a gray Thursday. I stood on the dock where he had always longed to stand. I could afford it without losing a night of sleep. And that fact settled strangely in my chest. The daughter who took the folding chair, now standing on the shoreline he had coveted his entire adult life. I told the agent I wanted it. I told myself it was for him. The papers began moving the following week, and the closer they came to signing, the more a small voice asked me a question I kept refusing to hear. I purchased it through a foundation, not because I was concealing anything, but because that is how you move real estate of that size cleanly. 2 years earlier, I had established the Open Door Foundation and had nearly forgotten I had. I had started it after a young woman on one of my framing crews aged out of foster care at 18 with 2 trash bags and nowhere to sleep. I knew that arithmetic. I knew those 2 bags. The foundation had funded a few scholarships and little else, a good intention with a bank account, waiting for me to determine what it was genuinely for. So the purchase ran through Open Door, and the closing was set, and my lawyer prepared a grant deed transferring the property out of the foundation and into the names of Raymond and Diane Albright. Free and clear. A gift with no conditions, the kind of thing that does not actually happen to people like Raymond. I held the draft of that deed in my hands at my kitchen table on a Sunday evening. 1 sheet of paper, heavy stock, a notary block at the bottom, 2 blank lines for the grantees. Raymond Albright. Diane Albright. I read their names where my lawyer had typed them, and I waited to feel the warm thing I had been chasing, the thing I had spent $4 million to feel in advance. I didn't feel it. I felt the folding chair against the backs of my knees. I felt 10 years old in a darkened hallway. I set the deed down exactly as I had set down the invitation 6 weeks before, face up this time, and I studied it for a long while. And the small voice finally grew loud enough to hear. I called Brenda before I did anything rash, because Brenda is the one Albright whose judgment I trust. We met at a diner halfway between our towns, the kind with vinyl booths and bottomless coffee. I told her some of it. Not the price, not the foundation. Just that I had found a way to give Raymond something enormous, and that I was no longer certain why I wanted to. Brenda stirred her coffee and regarded me for a long moment. "Kiddo," she said, "can I ask you something difficult?" I said sure. "When you picture handing it to him, what are you hoping he'll do?" I opened my mouth to say something noble, and what came out instead was the truth. "I'm hoping he'll finally say I'm his." Brenda nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've been waiting 20 years to hear a thing said aloud. "He won't," she said. Not unkindly, just with certainty. The certainty of a sister who had watched her brother refuse to grow for 6 decades. Raymond is who he is. A house won't change him. It'll just give him a grander thing to fail to deserve. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, warm and dry and steady. And she said something I would carry into that party like a coin in my pocket. "Not everyone who shares his blood is him. You know that, right?" I did not entirely know that, but I was beginning to. I drove home that night with the deed still in my bag and a different idea forming, slow and cold and clear. The kind of idea that feels nothing like revenge. The kind that feels, instead, like finally setting something down. I just needed one more piece of evidence before I allowed myself to trust it. The proof came at a dinner I should never have accepted. Diane invited me to the house the week before the party. Just family to go over the arrangements. I went, because the 8-year-old in my chest still answers when called. The house was exactly as I remembered. 5 matching chairs at the table, and the folding chair already positioned at the corner near the kitchen door, waiting for me before I had even removed my coat. Nobody remarked on it. 26 years was long enough to know what it meant. I almost laughed. Spencer was there, all grown and soft-handed and pleased with himself. An MBA he'd never put to use and a watch I had likely paid for. He pulled the folding chair out for me with a small theatrical bow, grinning. "You're thrown soft," he said. Diane laughed and said, "Don't be silly, Spencer." But she didn't tell him to stop. And she didn't pull out a real chair. I noted that the way I note everything. We ate. They talked about the party, the caterer, the arrangements, Raymond's speech. "Dad's been working on his toast for weeks," Spencer said, smirking into his wine. And Diane shot him a look, The look people exchange when a secret is enjoying itself too openly. I let it pass. I had learned long ago to keep my expression composed while my mind takes inventory, but I drove home turning that smirk over and over the way you worry at a splinter. There was a joke in this family that I was not part of, and it was about me, and it was scheduled for Saturday evening in front of 60 people. I did not yet know its precise shape. Brenda was the one who showed me the next morning, her hands trembling. She called at 7, her voice all wrong, careful and furious at once. "They added me to the family group chat by mistake," she said. "Soph, I'm going to send you something, and I'm sorry, and I almost didn't, but you deserve to know what you're walking into." The screenshot arrived, and I read it standing at my kitchen counter in my work clothes, coffee going cold beside me. I read it 3 times the way I had read the invitation. Except this time, nothing in me wanted to look away. 4 messages. Spencer first. "Is the charity case actually coming?" "Oh. Then be nice. She's good for the photos. Looks generous in front of the club." Then Spencer again. "She's not in the will, right?" And then Raymond. My father, the man whose name I'd had my lawyer type onto a $4 million deed. "Don't worry. I'll make it official Saturday. Everyone will know where things stand." I set the phone down very gently, because I have learned that the most powerful thing you can do when you are furious is to be deliberate. So that was the toast Spencer had been smirking about. That was the joke I wasn't part of. They weren't inviting their daughter to a birthday celebration. They were inviting a prop, a generous-looking prop, to stand in the background of the photographs and then be formally written out in public, for entertainment, with cake on the table. I expected to feel my heart break. Instead, I felt it go quiet. The particular quiet that settles over me just before I solve something. The quiet of a problem finally revealing its true shape. I looked at the deed sitting in my bag by the door, and I knew precisely what I was going to do with it. Here is what I understood, standing in my kitchen with that screenshot glowing on the counter. For 20 years, I had been trying to win an argument with people who had no intention of awarding me the point. I had been constructing a case, in furnaces and checks and now in a lake house, for why I deserved to belong. And they had been laughing about it in a group chat. You cannot earn your way into a room that has already decided you are the help. You can only stop knocking. So I did not cancel. I did not call in rage, which is what they would have done, which is what they would have understood. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I called my lawyer at home on a Saturday morning, and I told him I wanted to change the grantee on the deed. Remove Raymond and Diane entirely. There would be no names of theirs on anything of mine, ever again. The property would go where it should have gone from the beginning, where it would carry genuine meaning, where a sheet of paper could open an actual door. Transfer Loon Lake to the Open Door Foundation, I told him. Permanently. Irrevocably. To be converted into transitional housing for young people who age out of foster care with 2 trash bags and nowhere to go. Kids like me at 18. Kids like the girl from my framing crew. My lawyer asked if I was certain. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I didn't come for a name, I said, though he didn't know what I meant. I came to give one away. He prepared the revised deed that afternoon. We would sign and record it first thing Saturday morning, before the party, before the toast, before Raymond ever raised his glass. We met at the notary at 8:30, my lawyer and I, and a woman named Patricia, who stamped documents for a living, and had no idea she was witnessing the end of my childhood. I signed the grant deed transferring Loon Lake to the Open Door Foundation. Patricia notarized it. By 9 o'clock, my lawyer had recorded it electronically with the County Register of Deeds. And the moment that confirmation number came back on his phone, it was finished, carved into public record where no apology and no birthday speech could ever undo it. The house belonged to the children now. Then I did one more thing. I had my lawyer print me a single copy of the recorded deed, 1 sheet of paper, the grantee line reading the Open Door Foundation in plain black type. I folded it once and slid it into my purse. The real one was already filed. This was simply the version I was bringing to the party. The version I would set on the table. The version Raymond was going to hold in his hands while 60 people watched. I want to pause here and speak to you directly, because some of you are carrying an invitation like mine right now, an invitation to a room that never reserved you a real seat. You do not owe anyone your smallness. And you do not have to purchase your way into a love that keeps the receipt. If that lands for you, subscribe and stay with me, because what happens at that party is the entire reason I sat down to tell you this. I drove to the country club with the folded paper in my bag and my hands, for the first time in weeks, completely steady. The Briar Hollow Country Club had a ballroom with windows the height of a house and a lawn that stretched down toward the water. On the evening of Raymond's 65th, it was filled with precisely the people he had spent his life trying to impress, old colleagues from the insurance office, gone gray and comfortable. There were the country club men he golfed with, and their wives in fine jewelry, and the neighbors who had watched the Albrights drive slowly past Loon Lake on Sunday afternoons for 30 years. There was a banner, gold on white, 65 and never better. There was an ice sculpture losing an argument with the warm room, and there was a cake the size of a card table, 65 candles waiting to be lit, arranged near the head table where the family would sit. I stood in the doorway for a moment and took the room's measure the way I take a job sites, looking for the load-bearing parts, the places where pressure would gather. This was a stage built for one man's vanity, and every person in it was an audience he had assembled to witness his good fortune. They were also, though none of them yet knew it, about to witness something else. I had spent my entire childhood being displayed in rooms like this. The gift, the project, the brave little rescue. I knew precisely how these rooms functioned, how laughter traveled through them, how a single sentence spoken into a microphone could land on a person and pin them there. Raymond was counting on that. He had selected his weapon, 60 witnesses, a microphone, and the oldest cruelty in the repertoire, performed as a joke. He had no idea I had selected mine. I straightened my jacket and walked in. Diane found me before I had taken 3 steps inside, radiant in the particular way she becomes when there is an audience. Both hands extended. "Sophie, you came. Look at you." She kissed the air beside my cheek and guided me by the elbow, narrating my arrival to a cluster of women near the bar. "This is Sophie. Our Sophie. You've heard me talk about her. She's done so well for herself, hasn't she done well?" I shook hands and said the appropriate things and watched her use me, the generous gesture of having me there glowing off her like the jewelry she wore. Then she steered me toward the head table, and I saw it before she said a word. 6 places at the long table up front, 5 matching banquet chairs with gold ribbons tied to the backs, and at the far corner, near the swinging doors to the kitchen, a single folding chair, the metal kind, no ribbon, with a small tented place card in front of it. I leaned in to read the card. It said Sophie. Just Sophie. No last name. The way they had erased Fowler from everything for 16 years. Diane noticed me noticing, and had the grace at least to lower her voice. "We ran short of the good chairs, sweetheart. You won't mind. You'll take the folding chair." There it was again. The sentence from when I was 8, worn smooth from 26 years of use, handed to me one final time in a room full of people who would never understand what it had cost. I looked at the folding chair. I looked at the swinging kitchen doors behind it, where the staff moved in and out carrying other people's dinners. And I smiled at Diane, a genuine smile, because I knew something she didn't. I was never going to sit in it. I spent the next hour being a guest at a party assembled to humiliate me, and I did it with a glass of champagne I never drank in a composure that surprised even myself. Spencer found me by the windows and stood too close, doing the thing he does where he insults you and calls it banter. "So what is it you actually do again?" he said, swirling his drink. "Mobile homes? Modular?" I said that was right. "Trailers," he said, and laughed at his own joke. I let him. A man from Raymond's office asked me kindly how the family business was treating me, and before I could respond, Spencer said, "Oh, she's not really in the business." A small, uncomfortable silence followed. The man's eyes moved between us, and I watched understanding pass across his face, something about this family that they believed they were concealing. That happened twice more over the course of the hour. A neighbor asking whether I'd be at Christmas, and Diane replying, "We'll see, Sophie's so busy," in a tone that quietly closed the door. Someone's wife admiring my watch, and Spencer murmuring that it was probably a knockoff. Loud enough. Each one was a small cut, the kind they had been making my entire life. Too minor to bleed. Too frequent to dismiss. The old version of me would have absorbed every one of them, smiled wider, given more, worked harder to earn warmth that was never coming. But I had read the group chat. I knew that even my most gracious behavior was to them simply good for the photos. So I stopped performing. I stood there at ease and unhurried, and allowed them to be precisely who they were in front of their guests. Because the guests were watching now, truly watching, and that was going to matter very soon. Across the room, Raymond tapped a fork against a glass. The room fell quiet and turned. Raymond stood at the head table with a microphone in one hand and his reading glasses in the other, 65 years old, luminous with the attention he had been collecting his whole life. He was gifted at this part. He thanked everyone for coming. He made a joke about his knees, a joke about Diane's cooking, a joke about how a man knows he's old when his accountant stops laughing. The room adored him. He spoke about the insurance agency, the early years, building something from nothing, which made me press the inside of my cheek between my teeth, because Raymond had inherited the agency from his father and had never built anything from nothing in his life. He raised a toast to Spencer. My son. The future. Spencer rose and took a modest bow. The room applauded. Diane touched a napkin to the corner of her eye. I stood off to one side, near the folding chair I had not occupied, holding my untouched champagne, feeling the speech bending toward me the way weather bends toward a coastline. I could sense it coming. Spencer was grinning into his wine again. Diane had arranged her expression into something anticipatory and satisfied. Brenda, across the room, had gone pale and motionless. The only other person who knew what was in that group chat, the only one quietly bracing. Raymond turned to a fresh card. He looked out across his guests, found me at the edge of the room, and something flickered behind his glasses, anticipation, the look of a man about to deliver a line he had been polishing for weeks. He smiled. He lifted his glass just slightly higher. Now, he said, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a word about Sophie. Before Raymond could land it, something small occurred that he had not accounted for. A man near the front, one of the country club set, a developer named Harlan Pierce, whom I had never met but whose name I knew well, set down his drink and said, not loudly but with perfect clarity, Wait, Sophie Fowler? The room's attention shifted. Raymond, microphone still raised, said, That's right, our Sophie, in a tone that attempted to reclaim her, but Pierce wasn't looking at Raymond. He was looking at me, and his expression had opened into something between surprise and genuine regard. Bright frame, he said. You built the Hartwell development. The County Net Zero project. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. That was us. My firm bid against you on Hartwell, Pierce said with a brief, candid laugh, turning slightly toward the room now, explaining me to the people who had spent the evening referring to me as a trailer saleswoman. She runs one of the fastest-growing home builders in the state. Net zero, the real thing. We couldn't come near her numbers. A murmur moved through the ballroom. The particular murmur of 60 prosperous people recalibrating in real time. The neighbor who had admired my watch was regarding it differently now. Spencer had stopped grinning. The anticipatory expression on Diane's face had developed a fracture, and Raymond stood there with the microphone still raised and the polished line still loaded, suddenly aware that the room had learned, in the space of 15 seconds, that the charity case at the corner table was the most accomplished person he had ever invited anywhere. He could have stopped. A wiser man would have stopped, let the moment settle, raised his glass toward me, and sat down with his dignity intact. But Raymond had been rehearsing his line for weeks. And pride is a current that only flows in one direction. He cleared his throat and continued. Sophie's done well, that's true, Raymond said, recovering, deploying the smile that had charmed clients for 40 years, choosing to absorb the interruption and redirect it. Done well for someone who, let's be honest, didn't come from much. A few uneasy laughs scattered through the room. He was testing the ice. It held, so he stepped out further. Now, some of you know the story and some of you don't. Diane and I took Sophie in years ago, before our Spencer came along, and we did right by her. I think everyone here would say we did right by her. He paused for the murmur of agreement and received it, because the room still wanted to like him. Then he delivered the line he had been saving, the line from the group chat, the line he believed was the generous capstone to a generous life. He looked directly at me, lifted his glass, and spoke into the microphone in front of 60 people. But I'll tell you all a funny thing. We were redoing the will last month, and the lawyer asks about Sophie, and I had to think about it. He chuckled softly. Because here's the truth, sweetheart. No hard feelings. You're not really mine. I just forgot to cross you out. The room erupted. It was the laughter of people who have collectively decided something is permitted, loud and relieved and merciless. Glasses raised. A few whoops. Spencer's brain cutting through the rest. Diane laughing with her hand pressed to her chest as though the cleverness of it had genuinely wounded her. The ice sculpture dripped. The candles burned. 60 people laughed at the orphan in the folding chair, precisely as scripted. And in the middle of all that noise, I stood completely still and felt, for the first time in 26 years, absolutely nothing they could reach. I set my champagne down on the nearest table. I did not slam it. I set it down the way you set down a tool you are finished with. Then I reached down and picked up the folding chair, my folding chair, the metal one, with the place card that said only Sophie. The laughter began to falter as people noticed me moving. I carried it 3 steps and leaned it, folded, against the wall and out of the way. The way you put aside something you will never need again. Then I straightened my jacket and walked toward the head table, unhurried, my heels quiet on the parquet, and the room moved from laughter to silence in the time it took me to cross it, the quiet spreading outward from my footsteps like ripples on still water. Raymond's smile was still half-raised, the microphone still in his hand, his eyes tracking me with the first faint suggestion of uncertainty. Diane half rose from her chair. Spencer said, "Soph, it's a joke. Sit down." And his voice broke on the last word, because there was no chair to sit down in anymore. I had seen to that. I reached the head table, the long white table with the cake and the 65 candles and the 5 chairs with gold ribbons. I stopped in front of my father. I reached into my purse. And I want you to stay with me here, because what I placed on that table is the entire reason I am telling you this story. The reason I sat down to make this video at all. I took out a single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the white tablecloth in front of Raymond Albright, in front of everyone, and the whole room leaned forward to see what it was. "Happy birthday, Raymond," I said. My voice came out level and quiet, and in that silent room it carried further than his microphone had. I did not raise it once. I never would. I brought you a gift. I've been planning it for weeks. I want everyone here to know what it was, because you all just heard what you think I am, and now you're going to hear the rest. I touched the folded edge of the paper with one finger. 3 weeks ago, I bought Loon Lake. The name moved through the room like a current. Loon Lake. Half the people present had watched Raymond covet that house for 30 years. Diane made a small, involuntary sound. Raymond's eyes dropped to the paper, and his glass came down slowly to the table. "The stone house on the water," I said. "The boathouse, the 11 acres, the shoreline you used to drive us past on Sunday afternoons when I was a little girl, while you said when my ship comes in. I bought it cash and had a deed drawn up." I looked at him and kept my voice as measured as Diane's had ever been when she handed me that chair. "I was going to give it to you tonight. Put both your names on it. Hand you the one thing you had wanted your entire life, in front of all these people, as a gift." Someone at a back table whispered, "$4 million. Raymond was staring at the paper now as though it might move. His hand twitched toward it. And in the deepest quiet that ballroom had held all evening, I said the line I had carried in from the parking lot, the line I had told my lawyer, who hadn't understood it. But I didn't come for a name. I came to give one away. Then, while every person in that ballroom watched, I picked the deed up off the tablecloth and tore it in half. The sound was enormous in the silence. A single clean rip. Diane gasped. I folded the halves together and tore again and again, calm and unhurried, the way you'd tear up a check you have decided not to cash, until the paper was a small drift of fragments in my palm. Then I opened my fingers and let them fall onto the white tablecloth in front of Raymond, scattered across the linen between his birthday cake and his reading glasses. "That was a copy," I said. "I want to be very clear about that, because I know how this family handles inconvenient truths. That was only a copy." Raymond looked up at me, and for the first time all evening he had nothing ready. No line, no charm, no joke. "The original," I said, "was signed at 8:30 this morning, notarized, and recorded with the county at 9 o'clock, before I drove here." It is done. It is filed. It is a matter of permanent public record and cannot be undone by anyone in this room, including me. I let that sit. 60 people held their breath. Loon Lake doesn't belong to you, I said quietly. It never will. As of this morning, it belongs to the Open Door Foundation, and it is being converted into a home. A real one for young people who age out of foster care at 18 with 2 garbage bags and nowhere to sleep. My voice did not waver. Kids like the one you took in for the photographs and then left in a folding chair for 26 years. They get the lake house, Raymond. They get the boathouse and the shoreline and the someday. And you get to read about it in the paper. Raymond did the thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He reached out with both hands, this 65-year-old man in his good suit, and began gathering the torn fragments of the deed from the tablecloth. Clumsy, urgent. His reading glasses pressed up onto his nose, fitting the pieces back together right there on the linen in front of his guests. Nobody helped him. Nobody spoke. He worked the scraps with trembling fingers, matching torn edges, reconstructing the document the way a man tries to rebuild something he has already destroyed. And as the words reassembled beneath his hands, I watched him read them. Grant deed. Loon Lake. And on the line where he had expected, somewhere deep in his chest, across all his decades of wanting, to one day see his own name, the plain black letters read, The Open Door Foundation. He read it. He read it again. And the color left his face. All of it, from the forehead down, the ruddy tan of 40 years of weekend golf draining away until he was the gray of the February morning the old man at Loon Lake had died. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The most accomplished person he had ever invited to a party had just handed him, in pieces, proof that the daughter he had publicly disowned for a laugh had quietly given away more than his entire estate was worth to the precise kind of child he had failed. She's Diane's, not mine, he had said when I was 10. I just forgot to cross you out, he had said tonight. Now he sat with the torn truth assembled beneath his hands and understood that I had crossed myself out first, on purpose, and taken the only thing he had ever truly wanted along with me. His face went white, and the whole room watched it happen. Then the room came apart, exactly the way you would expect, everyone revealing in that unguarded moment precisely who they were. Diane went first. She rose from her gold-ribboned chair, and the tears arrived instantly, the practiced kind. She turned to her guests, not to me, always to the audience. After everything we did for her, she cried. We gave her a home. We gave her everything. And this is the cruelty she repays us with, in public, on your father's birthday. She reached for sympathy the way a drowning person reaches for anything floating. Nobody reached back. Spencer was worse, because Spencer didn't even attempt to frame it as grief. 2/2. You can't simply give away a $4 million house, he said, his voice climbing too loud. That's insane. That should have, you need to reverse that. He actually said it. Ours. The will not yet read, the father not yet gone, and the boy was already mourning money that was never going to be his. I looked at him and felt something close to pity, the way you feel about a creature that was raised wrong. And Raymond never stood up. He sat at the head of his own celebration with the torn deed reassembled beneath his gray hands, and he looked up at me, and for one unguarded moment, something genuine broke through. Something beneath 60 years of performance. A flicker of grief so authentic it nearly undid me. Sophie, he said. Just my name. Hoarse, his eyes wet, his hand lifting an inch off the table toward me. For that single second, he was a man who understood precisely what he had discarded. Then Diane said his name sharply, Raymond, a command. And he heard it. His hand came back down. He looked away. He chose her. He always had. I remained perfectly composed. I did not raise my voice at any of them. There was nothing remaining to say at volume. I collected my purse, buttoned my jacket, and looked at the three of them one final time. Diane performing her wound, Spencer doing arithmetic, Raymond staring at the tablecloth. And I felt the strangest sensation rise in me, which was neither triumph nor grief, but something cleaner than both. The feeling of setting down a weight you have carried so long you had forgotten it had a bottom. I spent my whole life, I said quietly to Raymond, trying to get you to claim me. Buying it, earning it, bringing baskets and furnaces, and nearly bringing you a lake. And tonight you stood up in front of all your friends and told me exactly who I am to you. I picked up one torn scrap from the tablecloth, just one, and closed it in my hand. So I'm going to believe you. You can keep the pieces. I already kept the part that mattered. Then I turned and walked the full length of that silent ballroom toward the tall windows and the doors beyond them. The only sound was my heels on the parquet, 60 people parting to let me through. Brenda was waiting near the doors, her eyes wet. She placed her hand on my arm, warm and dry and steady, the same way she had in the diner. "Atta girl, kiddo," she whispered. "Atta girl." I walked out of the Briar Hollow Country Club into a cool, clear evening. The lake breeze came up the lawn to meet me, and I did not look back once. The folding chair stayed folded against the wall where I had left it. I have never sat in one since. The aftermath was quiet and complete, the way the finest kind always is. The deed could not be reversed because there was nothing to reverse. The house belonged to the foundation lawfully, permanently, and the only people who might have wished to contest it had no standing to contest anything, because it had never been theirs to begin with. Spencer consulted a lawyer of his own that week, I was told. The lawyer informed him of what mine had already understood, that you cannot litigate your way into a gift that was never given to you. The local paper ran the story 2 weeks later, a warm piece about a self-made homebuilder donating a historic lakefront estate to house foster youth. It did not mention the Albrights at all, which I believe wounded them far more than any direct accusation could have. At the country club, Raymond's standing did what reputation does when the story beneath it fractures. People remain courteous to men they no longer admire. Diane stopped hosting. Spencer relocated to Florida. And Brenda, the one Albright who had always treated me like a person, drove out to see the property with me that autumn. We stood together on the dock where Raymond had always longed to stand. And she told me she was proud of me in a way no one bearing that last name ever had. I never spoke to Raymond or Diane again. Not from hatred. I simply had nothing remaining that I needed from them. A boundary, it turns out, is only the absence of a door you once kept knocking on. I went back to building houses. I let the 8-year-old in my chest finally go out and play. The following spring, Loon Lake opened its doors. We completed the renovations in March, almost a year to the day after the old man at Loon Lake had passed. We made it net zero naturally because I cannot help myself, and because those children deserve a house that costs nothing to keep warm. 8 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a counselor's office, a study room, and a long wooden dining table I had built myself in my own workshop on weekends, sanding it smooth by hand. The first residents moved in the week we opened. 6 of them, young people who had aged out with nothing, the way I had, the way the girl on my framing crew had. On their first evening, I drove out to make sure the heat was running and the pantry was stocked. I stayed for dinner because they asked me to. There were 7 chairs at the long table I had built. All of them matching. All of them good. A girl named Tasha, 18 and just aged out that very month, the youngest among them, lingered near the kitchen door the way I once had, waiting to be directed toward the lesser seat, already certain one existed. I recognized that posture. I had invented that posture. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the finest chair, the one with the view of the water, and I looked at her and said, "This one's yours." She didn't believe me at first. They never do. Then she sat down at the head of the table, in a house on a lake that a man had coveted his entire life and never deserved. She looked out at the water that was hers now, and she smiled the way a person smiles when they have finally been let in from the cold. There is not a folding chair anywhere in that building. There never will be. I spent 30 years attempting to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be mine. And the moment I finally stopped pulling out the folding chair and started building a longer table, I discovered there had always been more than enough room. Just never at the one I had been pleading at. That is my story. 1 folding chair, 1 sheet of paper, and a lake house that finally belongs to the children who only needed a door to open. If this reminded you that you do not have to purchase your way into anyone's family or sit small in a room that won't save you a seat, take that as your sign. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.